As a reminder, I'm Sarah Newman. I'm the director of the APG. It's great to have so many people coming onto this afternoon's talk, given the absolute gorgeousness of the weather, which I understand from chatting to a few people who are on the top, is as nice in Switzerland, Manchester, and lots of other places as it is in sweltering London. Today is the first of two top talks that we're doing on Insight. Next week, Los Horner of Lucky Generals will be giving a practical talk on finding insights when you're pressed for time and resource, using lots of examples from his own career, from his winning case histories from APG and other awards, and lots of really interesting kind of personal perspectives on how to do it better from one of the masters. So that's the 2nd of July at 4 p.m. if you're not signed up for that yet. But today we are really pleased to welcome Sam Knowles, and he's going to give us the big picture on Insight. If you don't know Sam already, he is an academic, a strategist and an author, and he has a PhD in experimental psychology and I think an unlimited enthusiasm for data and analytics. He's done quite a lot of training for us in the APG, which has been great, and for lots of other people directly as well. His latest book, How to Be Insightful, was published just a few weeks ago, and he's rather ambitiously going to roll up the history, psychology and neuroscience of insight into this afternoon's talk of just over 40 minutes. And he says, give us some ideas on application. So Sam, it's a very impressive promise. We're really, really looking forward to it. And no doubt it will whet people's appetites for the full version and perhaps send them onto Amazon to lap it up in book form. Sam will talk, as I say, for about 40 minutes. And as always, we would love it if you had questions. So if things occur to you as you go along, just put them into chat, and we will get to them in the end, at the end with a Q&A. Okay, thank you. Over to you, Sam.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you, APG. Thank you for the platform for this. Thank you, everybody, for not being outside. I myself live about 7 minutes from the south coast, but I'm delighted to be here to talk to you about, well, I say the history, the psychology, and the neuroscience of insight. When I was going through my slides earlier today, I think it might be more like the philosophy and etymology, psychology and neuroscience of insight. But let's see how we go. This is me. I live in Lewes, East Sussex. I'm Sam. I was originally a classicist, a badly taught classicist. You can see this is pre and post lockdown haircut. We managed to fashion the family haircut. I started life as a classicist. I couldn't do mathematics at school, but I got very much into story and storytelling and story structure. And there will be a little bit of classical magic sprinkled into this, certainly to the early history and philosophy of insight. I then worked for about a dozen years in PR and comms agencies, then went back to school in early 2000 to the University of Sussex, where, as Sarah said, I did a master's and a doctorate in experimental psychology.
Oh, gosh.
There I discovered a passion for numbers, for data and statistics. And when I came back out into consultancy, I realized that I could combine the two. It was perfectly possible to join together analytics and storytelling. I've run for the past 6 years and a little bit more a data storytelling agency, consultancy called Insight Agents from Lewes, East Sussex, and wherever my clients take me. And 2 years ago, Routledge published the first book for me, Narrative by Numbers, all about data storytelling, which, as Sarah says, I've trained. I've also trained using the principles in this. Well, if my talk was immodest and the history of the neuroscience and psychology of insight, then maybe the book is even more immodest. How to be insightful, unlocking the superpower that drives innovation. And a lot of the arguments that I'm going to be giving to you today are featured in that, but there's some new stuff too, because hey, we live in new and interesting times. Enough of those ugly mugs. Why? Why is it important that anyone really should care about what insight is and how to get there? So you may well know, I'm going to show you a short, well, I'm going to show you about a 2-minute ad that I think is one of the most insightful ads and based on one of the strongest insights in recent years in the laundry category. But you may know this, that soap opera was developed for Procter & Gamble in the 1930s as a medium, as an advertising medium, a homely, homespun radio drama. Between 1933 and 2004, I think it's fair to say that the underlying, if we want to call it insight, that underpinned laundry advertising was that you were a bad mother, not a father, but a bad mother, if your children's clothes weren't whiter than white. And soap opera was developed, as I say, as the advertising vehicle, until a team led by Aline Santos at Unilever, when she was in Brazil running the laundry category, came up with something rather different. And I want to show you this short film.
I didn't know what freedom was until it was taken from me. It's devastating. I've had who I am inside stripped away. You can never escape the walls. You can never escape your mind. Then imagine they open your door. You have time to walk out that door and feel the sun on your face. It's everything to me.
My daily outdoors time, I think, is probably the most important part of my day.
Take all the frustrations and all your problems and just leave them out there.
Keeps my mind right, keeps my body strong.
Pretty much the highlight of my day.
So, how would you feel if your yard time was reduced to just 1 hour a day?
Yeah. What am I supposed to tell you how I feel about that?
I'm going to feel pretty sad about it.
I think that's going to build more anger, it's not going to be a good thing.
Would be torture.
I think cutting the offender's outside time to an hour a day is potentially disastrous.
Well, do you know who does have only 1 hour outdoors per day? Children.
Wow. That's depressing. I don't even know what to say to that.
Something has gone very wrong.
Even as I sit in here as a prisoner, I mean, yeah, that's not good.
If you don't have to throw the kids in the bathtub, they haven't played hard enough.
Climb a tree, break a leg. You know, that's part of life.
Learn to be a kid.
So, if you could have one wish, what would it be?
I wish I could take my kid to a park today.
So for me, that's a glorious piece of data-driven storytelling. I mean, clearly the data there, the factor about kids just having a single hour, but actually it's the insight, the dirtiest good insight that underpins that allowed Unilever to rewrite the norms of the laundry category, and in many, many markets around the world, retake the pole position as the leading laundry brand. So here's a problem that some of you may well be facing quite soon, the glut. If any of you have an allotment, you'll know that in August, September time, when you've made courgette spaghetti, courgette frittata, zucchini fries, courgette cake, you're left with bags and bags and bags of the things. You end up leaving them on the doorsteps of your neighbors. It's a metaphor for the sheer amount of data that we all face today. How do we reliably move as planners and as strategists from data through information, coalescing, helping to line up those data points into knowledge and insight. And then once we have the insight that allows us wisdom and maybe ultimately impact in terms of commercial results. I have a quote here from a book written by an excellent forensic scientist, the forensic scientist Angela Gallup, who is responsible for working out Rachel McKell's case, Damilola Taylor, Stephen Lawrence. In full disclosure, she is also my sister, my elder sister. She says in this book she published last year, When the Dogs Don't Bark, it's frequently more important to look for evidence when the dogs don't bark. So joining up the dots, the thing that strategists do so well. Syzygy, my favorite word, S-Y-Z-Y-G-Y, brilliant if you get those letters in Scrabble, never happened to me. Planetary alignment, alignment of the stars. For those of you who remember The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, here is a snapshot, a screenshot from the original Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy showing the planet Betelgeuse. I show you the planet Betelgeuse because The black Betelgeuse is a very bright star in the sky. And here are 18 different interpretations, 18 different alignments of stars here in different mythology, from Orion in the west to Hawaiian star lines, the cat's cradle. We seek to make sense out of individual dots of data. We seek to build and put narratives using individual pieces of data. If that's what we do with the stars, then that's absolutely what we do with our brains, joining together the dots. So we take in information through our curiosity, and we allow our subconscious mind, and I'll argue that there is a subconscious mind, to do its recombinatorial best. As Vilfredo Pareto, the 80-20 rule Italian philosopher, said, an idea is nothing more or less than a combination of old elements. Simon Sinek, Mr. Start with Why, saying that there are only a finite number of problems, but an infinite number of solutions. Echoing back to the linguist Noam Chomsky from MIT, who would talk about the recombinatorial brilliance of language, a finite number of words, but an infinite number of sentences that you can possibly make out of them. It is quite possible, despite the near 8 billion people on the planet, that many of the sentences that I've said in the last 10 minutes have never been said before on this planet. Same with ideas, are old and old joining together to make new. You know, you can do remarkable things when you are curious and join stuff together, some of which we might feel we need more than others, some of which we might feel we need smartphones, but maybe smart toilets is not necessarily a brilliant use of the insightful minds that we have. We might think that school strike and Greta Thunberg's movement is good. I'll let you to decide on Brexit and the EU. Repeal the 8th, interesting. Beetroot burgers that bleed beetroot juice. Actually, is that something that I'm not saying necessarily that any of these ideas are good or bad, but they rest on what has come before, and they rest on the curiosity of those who developed them and who joined together old stimulus to make something new. Because in the evolution of ideas and of innovation, something has rather got in the way, I think. You know, the ordinary progress of ideas within many organizations, particularly risk-averse, big brand organizations, the evolution of ideas and innovations, despite the impact of the tech disruptors, can be really slow. Unfortunately, coronavirus has put all that on fast forward. So for those companies, for those brands that we're all working with, including our own, that are going to recover, bounce back, thrive and grow again, I think it's really important that we have a way of fast tracking innovation. So here's what Purcell did immediately into lockdown. For years, we encouraged you to get dirty outdoors. You know, dirt is good. Now we thank you for playing indoors. I think that shows the power and the enduring strength of an insight which is 16, 17 years old now, the actual original insight, the ability to repurpose that for these times. Here's a model, not my model, a model from a consultancy. You know, the strategy that we need to go through, the hypothesis, the experiment, the test and learn, the analysis and optimization and the rollout, again, gone on fast forward. I argue that we need to have a structure and a way and a means of understanding how we get to insight quicker. Daniel Kahneman, the cognitive psychologist, Mr. Thinking Fast and Slow. Thinking, he says, is to humans as swimming is to cats. They can do it, but they prefer not to. And in bringing you some of the philosophy, the history, the psychology and neuroscience of insight, and lining them up, I hope in kind of planetary alignment, I hope to give you a structure that will enable you, it's a structure, not the structure, a structure that can enable you to be more insightful, the promise of the book. Okay, history, which I very nearly changed to philosophy. The Greeks, as so often, had a word or indeed words for it. That's you'll excuse my classical references. There's only 3, I think. But Plato and Aristotle in particular, and Socrates, if we're to believe Plato's write-up of him, had words for it. And they were beginning to explore what insight and imagination and innovation? What were the underpinning blocks of it? So they call Plato in his Republic. He takes this idea, the idea, the form, the semblance, the look, the underpinning essence of something to its logical extreme. As a philosopher, a lover of wisdom, you know, he's always looking, starting from Socrates' position of ignorance, for knowledge, for episteme, for gnosis, for knowledge, for noesis, knowing and understanding. It comes from the word nous, where we get the word nous. The Greeks, the ancient Greeks, didn't have a word specifically for insight. They had this adjective diaretikos, clear-sighted, which in modern Greek becomes insight, diaretikotita. But they were thinking about it. They were thinking about it and playing with it. Hedgehogs and foxes. A fox knows many things, but a hedgehog just one thing. And I think as strategists, we need very much to be on the fox side rather than the hedgehog side. Isaiah Berlin, the Oxford academic, the founder of Wolfson College, founding bursar of Wolfson College, wrote a book in 1953 called The Hedgehog and the Fox. He claimed it was a bit of a joke, really, and it was an essay on Tolstoy's rather hedgehoggy, monomaniacal view of history. It was taken more seriously than he intended, but I think it's a useful metaphor. It's a useful metaphor that inspires us to curiosity, not just curiosity for today's brief, but curiosity as a way of life. And indeed, Nate Silver, Mr. Signal and Noise, excellent book, Signal and the Noise, you'll see his logo has always had a fox. It's always been a fox. It's quite a stylized fox for his 538 blog now. But he encourages us in the Signal and Noise to be more foxy, to look for multiple solutions rather than the hedgehog approach, which is to trundle along. If it doesn't eat us and it moves, then we can try and eat it. To be more foxy. So insight, the word insight, and similar versions of it appear in lots of these clustered languages, Scandinavian, Low German. 1200, I think insight comes into English, sight with the eyes of the mind. I think that's rather good. Penetrating understanding into the character or hidden nature. Well, I think we all might think that's not a bad description from 1850. Alexander von Humboldt, I'm sorry I don't speak German, so let's translate that immediately. The most dangerous of all worldviews, this German polymath is said to have said, the most dangerous of all worldviews, Weltanschauung, is the worldview of people who've never looked at the world. So this curiosity theme, again, it's been there from the beginning of the exploration. Okay, so that's philosophy etymology, early philosophy etymology. I'm not dealing with the English and the German philosophers of the 17th, 18th, 19th century here. We've only got 40 minutes, but I wanted just to set it out in that beginning, partly because it's where I come from and what's inspired me, but also because I think that there are some clear lines that we can join together. So the psychology. This is an ancient Egyptian symbol, the Ouroboros. The Ouroboros is an autophage, a self-eating dragon that came to Western culture from Egypt via Greece. And the chemist, Auguste Kekulé, in a pre-microscopic age, had a dream one night based on the Ouroboros, and that dream was the molecular structure of benzene. And the Ouroboros inspired him to unpick what the molecular structure must have been like. Now in the era of mass spectrometry, we know that he was right. But interesting that his curiosity for ancient Egyptian mythology helped him to unlock. So you never know when that curiosity is going to be useful. Now, perhaps the grandfather of insight, one could say of modern insight, is a man called Graham Wallace, who, when at the London School of Economics in 1926, published a beautifully titled, but almost impenetrable to read, book called The Art of Thought. He wasn't really an experimental psychologist, he was a cognitive, observational psychologist. Experimental psychology hadn't really taken off in England at that time. But he put forward a model of insightful thinking that has some roots in the ancient Greek philosophers, and then it comes through as psychology gets more and more experimental. And it's a model that crops up 4 or 5 times during the course of the 20th century, which I think is fascinating. So his 4 steps to insight are preparation, incubation, illumination, and verification. So Graham Wallace is very much an abstract Latinate word type. But preparation, the problem is investigated from all directions. Incubation, not consciously thinking about the problem. I think this issue of conscious versus subconscious processing of stimuli is vital here. And indeed, we'll see that neuroscience has demonstrated exactly how and where this happens. Illumination, the appearance of the happy idea, what some may call a eureka moment, doesn't need to be a flash of a moment, but the illumination. And then the verification, testing. Well, does this sound a little bit like some of our jobs? I wonder if it does. Another man here, James Webb Young. He worked at J. Walter Thompson from 1916 to 1964 and was the first president of the US Advertising Council. He wrote, every good creative person in advertising has always had two noticeable characteristics. First, no subject he couldn't easily get interested in. Second, he was an extensive browser in all sorts of fields of information. For it is with advertising, man as with the cow, no browsing, no milk. Now, Webb Young published, it's really a pamphlet, it's readily available now, many times reprinted, with a glowing endorsement from Bill Bernbach, a technique for producing ideas. Webb Young, I think, unnecessarily introduces a fifth element. But this idea, this way, this approach, you know, we know very little about, we know a lot about the plumbing of the brain. We don't know a lot about how the brain does its cognitive processes, or at least we haven't until recently. It's interesting that this technique that he outlines and similar variants of it popped up 4 or 5 times. The Gestalt school of psychology, so I'm moving across to Germany now, Wolfgang Köhler, the Gestalt school of psychology, he was one of the pioneers there. He was looking at apes, he was looking at the mentality of apes, and he identified in higher primates, in chimpanzees in particular, the ability to make insightful breakthroughs, to solve problems using materials they'd never seen, specifically boxes and sticks to get hold of bananas. But it wasn't Köhler, it was a successor of his, Bühler, who came up with this lovely German phrase, aha Erlebnis, which is the insight experience, the aha moment. So German psychology, German experimental psychology was definitely heading in this direction too. Elastic thinking, I'll come back to elastic thinking very shortly, but tests of elastic thinking, you know, bounded thinking, functional fixedness, where we're unable to break out of the norms, makes it hard for us to solve problems. But if we can make ourselves more elastic in our thinking, these are some of the classic tests of the elasticity of thinking. I'm not going to run this as a quiz now, but how does the woman who's in this, let's call it a panic room, she needs to pull both ropes simultaneously. There's a pair of heavyweight pliers on the table. Well, the answer is she clamps them onto the end of the string, swings the rope, it becomes a pendulum, and then she can let herself out of the room. But we don't think necessarily of pliers as being a pendulum. The classic thinking outside the box experiment, the 9-dot problem. How do you draw, just with 4 lines, join all those dots with 4 lines without taking your pen off the paper? It's impossible to do it without going outside the box. Or Ducla's candle problem. Here's a box of thumbtacks or drawing pins, a candle and some matches on a table, probably the table in the panic room with the woman with the pliers. What Ducla wants us to do is to get the candle to be suspended off the table to illuminate the room, and he wants no wax to drip on the table. Well, if you're bounded by thinking that that is a box of thumbtacks or drawing pins, you can't see that you can empty the drawing pins out, put it on the wall, melt the bottom of the candle and turn it into an impromptu candlestick. So these tests of elastic thinking, Guilford's alternate uses, another great way of finding out quite how instinctively insightful maybe some of your younger planners may be. You know, what can we do with a brick? Yes, we can build a house and a shopping center and a factory. We can also, it could be an elephant's earring, it can be a paperweight. What can we do with shoes? Somebody in a course I was running, I think with the APG back in May, said an impromptu wine cooler off the side of a boat. I thought it was a fantastic use of it. What can we do with paper? So alternate uses. It's an experiment that's 64 years old now, Guilford, 74 years old now, Guilford's alternate uses. But it's a really good way of looking at the elasticity of thinking, about how good we are at accessing the old plus old equal new, interesting, slightly left field, maybe more insightful breakthrough ideas. Analytical thinking and insightful thinking are different things. Like all analogies, this is an imperfect one, but I think it's not bad. analytical thinking, however hard a Sudoku may be, if you're good at Sudoku, if you're really good at Sudoku, and it's a solvable puzzle, you will be able to solve it. Analytical thinking yields to and respects time input, intellect and brain power. It's linear and logical, trial and error will get you there. It's reducible to predictable formulae. It demands the sustained application of conscious processing, and it thrives on time spent working on the problem. As opposed to cryptic crossword solving, insightful thinking, this combination of old and old making new, thriving on time out, distraction, pause. Time out is absolutely key here, to allow your subconscious mind to do its recombinatory best. It delivers immediate comprehension. It demands the focused application of subconscious, not conscious processing, and it really gets to the heart of the matter, the why behind the what. So that's the psychology. And lastly, in my triad, before we come on to some practical examples, the neuroscience. So neuroscience, when it started out, wasn't terribly good. You will be, I'm sure, if any of you have studied psychology, or if you've ever been to a psychology Don's room, you'll have seen that they have a phrenology head. The brain was thought to contain different places that were responsible for different things. On this slide, we can see just about here, apparently number 18, marvelousness, next to number 17, hope. But I'm glad that there's a specific place for marvelousness. We now know that phrenology has about as much validity as astrology. Phineas Gage, if anyone studied cognitive psychology, you'll know about Phineas Gage. He was a railway worker. He was holding the tamping iron that he used to put gunpowder when he was going to do explosions. He's got his eye closed because he's recovered from the accident. He tamped down too hard one day. It exploded, went straight up through his frontal lobes, cauterized his brain. He eventually recovered. Didn't get infected, eventually recovered, but his character was changed. And that was the beginning of understanding that different parts of the brain are responsible for different things. I'm not saying there's a module for marvelousness, but that when the frontal lobes were, or half the frontal lobes were removed, Gage, a devout Christian man, became profane and swore at the slightest opportunity. He developed Tourette's. He was unable to hold himself back. And ever since then, studies neuroscientific studies of the way that brains function and otherwise, that's the starting point of it. Now, the parallel lines here, there's a couple of books here. One is the origin of our understanding of the neuroscience of insight, and the other is the one that brought it to the world. So the Eureka Factor is the joint work of two American professors from Northwestern and Drexel University, Kunios and Beeman. One works with EEG, the skull caps. The other one looks right inside the brain using functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI. And they were working in parallel and discovered that they were both able to explain exactly what happens when we take stimulus in, when our brain recombines things, and what happens particularly at the moment of insight. And there's something particularly exciting and important that happens at the moment of insight. It was brought to my attention through another book that came out a couple of years ago called Elastic by Leonard Mlodinow. Leonard Mlodinow is a former Caltech physicist. He's run a game software company. He's been a script editor on 4 seasons of Star Trek: The Next Generation, and he's a physicist, but he's explained cognitive psychology and how it links to neuroscience. So one of the exciting things, they talk about the importance and the role of curiosity. They talk about the critical importance of time out and when a resting brain is actually at its most active, recombining things, suggesting that things might go together. And then at the moment of insight, and they've demonstrated this in the scanner and with the skull caps, at the moment of insight, the visual cortices at the back of the head that represent about 40% of the brain get very quiet indeed. It's like going from a floodlight in a theatre to a spotlight. And then that is the moment, just after that, milliseconds after that, that somebody will consciously have joined something together and said, I've had a breakthrough, I've had a eureka moment. So one other thing, in my How to Be Insightful book, I interview a lot of people. I interview obviously people from marketing and market research, but also actors. Peter Firth, Harry from Spooks is in there, and Baroness Susan Greenfield, the neuroscientist. And she told me, pointed me in the direction of some really interesting Dutch research, Dutch environmental psychology research that says, if we are outside and somewhere big, so ideally looking at El Capitan, perhaps. If we're outside and somewhere big, time appears to slow down. We're able to process more stimulus in less time, as opposed to if we're stuck in an office looking at a smartphone, we're able to process actually less information in the same amount of time. So getting out somewhere big, but also taking time out somewhere big, I think is critical. Okay, so I'm going to bring this together into this model for insightful thinking. To add men's views, so Mike Teasdale for many years ran a team of planners, a team of 86 planners, Unilever planners across the Lowen Partners network as it then was, reviewing 300 Unilever brand briefs every year, each one beginning what insight drives this belief. Mike's view on insight, he talks about it as being a glimpse inside the mind of the target audience, shining a light on a possible solution to the problem we've defined. Insight increases the chances of creative breakthrough, makes the creative process less random, incites behavior change. It's a great definition. Pierre-Emmanuel Maire, who runs something called Brand Think Tank in Paris, worked with Eleni Santos on Dirt is Good. He's got a kind of oil-soil definition. Unearthing genuine insights is like finding oil. First you zone in the right area, next you mine in the right place, then you extract something relatively crude, and finally refine until you have something truly powerful. So I think in a big data world, it's very often we are presented with data or casual observations or even, heaven forfend, snapshots of screenshots of dashboards and said, look, here's the insight. Well, of course it's not. It isn't a statement of the bleeding obvious, although it can often feel like that. And it isn't the same thing as empathy, although that helps. I'll give you, there's no great drum roll here, but I'll give you my definition. This comes from the book. But for me, it's this profound and useful understanding of a person, a thing, a situation, or an issue. And I bear all of this history, psychology, neuroscience in mind here. A nugget of data-driven certainty, evidence-based certainty. And it helps us do this fantastic so what, now what thing. It enables us to say, this is what it means, and therefore this is what we should do as a result. And I have this model, I built this model. It's a model I've trained for the APG with great success. People like it. It's a practical, simple tool. It has its roots with Wallace. It goes through Webb and the other places that this 4-step model appeared. I call it the step prism of insight. Sweat, be curious, time out, take time out. The importance of taking time out. If you don't take time out, the impossibility of having a breakthrough is reduced significantly. Eureka, what does it feel like? Emotionally, physically, physiologically, to have that experience and then prove, capturing it and testing it and validating and verifying it with your competitors in your agency, with your clients, whoever it may be, your strongest critics. Is it really something that's insightful? So this is just a simple framework. As I quoted Kahneman earlier, saying that we don't like to think about thinking, it is as swimming is to cats. This just gives us a little bit of metacognitive power to be able to think about thinking. Now, just before we finish and we take some questions, I just want to think about a formula, a way that you might find, you may well already use something very similar to this, but a formula for expressing insights. It's not just, millennials are drinking more beer these days, or we don't snack as we used to. More than that. It needs to be logically more than that. This is not a universal formula, it's just a formula. Just as this isn't a universal model, it's just a model. But this formula, statement 1, because of statement 2, creates a consequence. It can be a useful way of expressing it. So let's have a look at 3 examples. Dove Campaign for Real Beauty. Many women don't like how they're portrayed by the beauty industry because most women don't have figures that, like those that dominate the fashion press, creates a fact that many women suffer from low self-esteem. So that data-driven fact that drove that was the cross-cultural survey that Ogilvy did in 20 markets that showed that only 2% of women at the beginning of the Campaign for Real Beauty would use the word beautiful to describe themselves. Statement 1, statement 2 creates. The fantastic Sport England This Girl Can. So again, there's a cracking piece of data in here. I love the fact that, I love it when numbers pull apart from one another. The data storyteller in me can't resist that. 85% of women fear being judged when they exercised. They found that those girls and women who didn't exercise, they feared being judged. They also found that almost nobody judges girls or women who don't exercise or do exercise because they're just not noticed. Those that do judge, 85% judge them positively. Anyway, back to my formula. 85% of women fear being judged when they exercise, because the presentation of exercise in the media, in television, in sport, is the preserve of honed athletes, which creates a gender exercise gap with 1.6 million fewer women exercising than men. Specific with some data points there. But again, 1, 2 creates. Last one, dream crazy. So I'm not thinking about what Nike's doing at the moment, I'm thinking about their harnessing of Colin Kaepernick for the 30th anniversary of the Just Do It campaign, the Believe in Something campaign. And that's all about limiting the aspirations. So we limit our aspirations of what we can achieve in sport, because society and coaches and bosses and everybody else, our friends and peers, tell us how far we can go based on our origins and our situation, which creates unfulfilled potential of people like Colin Kaepernick, of people like the Williams sisters, who never were. So it's just a formula. Drawing to the end here, I'm a big fan of To Kill a Mockingbird. I'm hoping, if theatres reopen, to see Rhys Ifans playing Atticus Finch on the West End stage sometime this year. I'm due on the 27th of August, that seems unlikely. Atticus Finch talking to his daughter Scout in To Kill a Mockingbird. You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb inside his skin and walk around in it. I'm aware that with my To Kill a Mockingbird, with James Webb Young, the pronouns have been his. We'll excuse them from the past century without knocking them down. I think the idea there about not insight being the same thing as empathy, but I think the fact that if we are curious enough, if we put what we fill the hopper of our subconscious mind with into timeout and let it get on with its thing, then we're able to have those breakthrough insights that enable us to get inside the skin, the mind, the mindset, the shoes of those we're seeking to influence with our commercial communication or our public health education, whatever it might be, and we're therefore more likely to succeed. So syzygy, there we are, there's the spelling again, in case you're playing lockdown Scrabble and those letters come up. Planetary alignment. I really do believe that through philosophy, or the history of insight that comes through philosophy and a bit through etymology, through psychology, the early thoughts of Wallace, but the Gestalt school, and then those tests like Guilford's alternate uses tests. So what people thought philosophically, what was demonstrated in the lab, and then since what has been shown to be actually happening in the brain before, during, and at the moment of insight. I think we've got some fairly decent planetary alignment. And that's all I have to say. I'd love to hear your questions.
Thank you, Sam. That was fascinating and a very, very quick and concise and well-ordered tour around the key pillars of insight. So thank you very much indeed. Before anybody else has any questions, I have a sort of an unformed question, which I just wanted to sort of mention at this stage, which came from what you were saying just now about the people you'd quoted in your talk. And it was apparent to me as you were talking, and we're all very aware at the moment, that you only quoted one woman, Susan Greenfield, I think it was, in the various comments that you were making, and that a lot of the most insightful ideas about insight had come from men. And yes, I wonder whether in society and in culture, we generally think of women, I might be wrong, as more insightful than men. And I wondered if you had any comment on that.
So there was at least 3, and I can't remember the third, but and you're probably discounting one because she's my sister, but she is the world's best. I stand
corrected. It was a balance thing.
She is the world's best forensic scientist, so and one of the most insightful people I've ever met. So when I was going back and looking at the particularly ancient Greek philosophy, who knew? I thought I'd given it up 30 years ago, but I did dive back in. You know, written by men, about men, featuring men at dinner parties. There is actually, in Plato's Symposium, there's a tremendous character called Diotima, who teaches Socrates all about love, but she doesn't. They're not really interested in introspection. Sorry, I'm not trying to throw you. I'm not trying to throw your forming question off the scent. I would not deny for a second that this is not a. I would not propose that this is a gendered issue, and it may very well be that women are more insightful than men. Those that have been involved in the development of the philosophy, the history, because of the patriarchy of societies in which those have been developed until very recently. A lot of those have been men, and I read widely, and I wanted to talk to lots of different people. You know, in my interviews in my book, I don't just talk to Harry from Spooks. I also talk to another actor, Alexandra McKibben, starred with him indeed in Lester Brezhnev. So I think it's, personally, I think it's a gender neutral thing. As I was looking through my slides, I was conscious that I was quoting Atticus Finch talking to his daughter. I was conscious that it was Webb Young. I think it's an artifact of history, but you've got me scurrying back to my bookshelves.
Thank you. The next question we have is from Bridget Angier, who says, the examples have attention in them. Do all insights need one? Do all insights need attention?
Gosh, that's a tremendous question. I think it really helps. I think it really, really helps. And you might say, well, you know, I've made a self-selecting choice of dirt is good, of this girl can, of campaign for real beauty, of dream crazy. I guess I've chosen those because that sense of tension adds to what I would believe is the quality of the insight, and it also has the potential to make these campaigns enduring. So Real Beauty broke in 2005-6, I think. Just Do It, maybe Just Do It. I mean, Just Do It was. I'm not saying Just Do It is the insight. I think Just Do It is the expression. Phil Knight, in his autobiography Shoe Dog, about the creation of Nike, he worked with Bill Bauman to create. Bill Bauman, the track coach, I think he expressed the insight better, was if you have a body, you are an athlete. But that's something that Bauman's had been saying since the early 60s. It's inspired that when they started advertising in Seattle in the 80s, and it lives on. They've just had the 30th anniversary. It seems to have a lot of potential. This Girl Can is in its fourth iteration. I think it's the fourth set of films that they've most recently produced. So those examples that I give have got, each of them, more than a decade, some of them 3 or 4 decades of longevity. And it could be that the fact they have that tension in them, that's what makes them so enduring. I haven't got a scientific answer, but those examples definitely do have that tension in them. Thank you. And Bridget, if there's anything you want to add to that, please feel free. But just now, let's skip to Vicky, who's the planner, or the progenitor of This Girl Can. Vicky, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, hi, Sam, thank you so much for that. It's really, really thought-provoking. I think for me, really interesting listening to your definition of insight, which I think is very, very helpful. It feels as though there's a crucial word in there, which is useful. So the difference between data and insight is when that data can be defined as useful. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that, because that feels to me like the absolute crux of this, was when you know that you've got something that is more than just a data point, and how you can spot that more easily, or combine it with something else to make something useful. Could you just elaborate a little bit more on that difference? Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, thank you. Well, I mean, thank you for your keen reading of that line, the words that were highlighted in red. And I think you're absolutely right. Profound. Well, it needs to have legs. It needs not to be, as I say, a statement to the bleeding obvious. Although I do think that many really good insights, if they have tensions or not in them, many really good insights do indeed sound like statements to the bleeding obvious. And I think that when they occur to some of us, individually, in teams, when we see them presented to us, yeah, we all knew that. Surely our competitors or other categories have been. Oh no, they haven't been talking about it. But it is that real usefulness, that allows us to go on and do something in a sustained way. And my reframing, if you like. I had written, I was saying to Sarah before we started, I had written and edited and been through all the rounds of copy and the rest of the editing that book writers will know you go through. I'd finished everything on the Insight book in
February. I think there were maybe a couple, I don't know, you know, there wasn't a death of coronavirus in the UK. And I was speaking to a friend who runs a communications agency, and she said, well, you do realise that you need to find your provocation around coronavirus for this, don't you? And I kind of thought, do I really? You know, there's no mention of anything. You know, there's plenty of Brexit in there, clearly, but there's no mention of coronavirus in there. How can it be? And she said, well, have you read the subtitle that's on the cover of this book that says, Unlocking the Superpower That Drives Innovation? So that superpower, insight, the ability to be insightful, unlocking that superpower that drives innovation. As I say, the reason I quoted that Kahneman quote twice, partly I like showing the picture of the cat wearing the swimming jacket, but more importantly, I don't think we often stop and think about thinking. We're not terribly metacognitive creatures. That's partly, as many psychologists will say, it's partly because we lack the cognitive architecture to be able to understand how our cognitive architecture works. You know, that's a shame, but we're not bright enough to understand how 110 neurotransmitters can interact with one another. Nevertheless, if we make frameworks and structures, and as I say, I offer mine up very humbly, but I found it to be useful to people who are thinking about insight, who are thinking about either insight functions or what they do or how they get insights themselves. If we stop, literally take time out from our jobs and think about how we think, we're likely to become ourselves more insightful. But that word useful, profound and useful, it needs to allow us to do something. It needs to enable us to move from so what to now what. This is what we should do as a result, and hopefully we should be able to do that for a long time. You know, there are some that will just run and run, and you know, yours, I have no doubt, will run and run.
It's actually, that's really interesting what you say about the statements of the bleeding obvious, and actually how some insights can feel really obvious after the fact. When we look back with, you know, with the benefit of hindsight, we can go, oh, right, okay, of course that's clear. But I do remember when we were talking to people in some early research groups around This Girl Can.
Yeah.
And we were just talking about, one of the women in the groups was talking about her experience of the gym, yeah, and how she felt like everyone was staring at her. And one by one, all the women in the group went, oh, I feel like that. Oh no, I do too. And so it was like suddenly everyone realised they were all feeling the same things. And now I think we can look back on that and go, well, of course we all know that we feel judged, don't we? But at the time, no one had recognised it in themselves. They thought, well, rather they thought they were alone in the way that they felt, and they didn't realise everybody else felt the same way. So I think it's so true. You have to remember where everyone was at the beginning.
Yeah, but I mean, you can only see me from the shoulders, but I certainly don't have the body of a runner. I don't have the physique of a runner, but I run 3 or 4 times a week, in part inspired by This Girl Can. I'm afraid I crossed the boundary there. Although my wife plays in a football team that was entirely inspired by This Girl Can. But I think that there's a line that I quote from the English satirist Alexander Pope in the book. He said, "True wit is nature to advantage dressed, what oft was thought, but ne'er so well expressed." And I think it is that you know, what oft was thought. Actually, many people may have, exactly as you say in your focus groups, many people may have felt that. But I mean, I wonder. I mean, the reason that they hadn't volunteered that they thought they were alone, was because it would trigger a sense of shame or a sense of you know, I really oughtn't to feel that. But I do think that what oft was thought, but ne'er so well expressed, is a useful line. I have it along with many other things.
And it makes the point as well that the ability to sum up an insight really well with a really good use of vocabulary can make it sing and make it actionable and make it powerful. If it's not well expressed, then it's not, quite often. A couple more questions. One nice one from Sally, who says she agrees about curiosity, but are there any specific subject areas that you think yield more opportunity for insight? So she talks about sociology versus physics versus current affairs. Any thoughts on that, Sam?
Well, I mean, of course, there isn't time to go and read everything, is there? But I mean, I think the curiosity is a. I mean, I think I'm biased. I'm biased by, not necessarily by the classics, but I'm certainly biased by psychology. I'm biased by particularly cognitive psychology. I think there's some very interesting stuff in there. I think that I think that's definitely true. But I mean, my exhortation on curiosity, on sweat, as I call it, is that it needs to become a way of life. And I think interestingly that the generation who will be coming into God knows what sort of workforce in kind of 3 or 4 years' time, the Gen Z, the iGen, have a level of curiosity that maybe had been missing for a couple of generations before. So I think we're going to be well set for curiosity and innovation. But it's really about inspiring that curiosity to not just be for the brief that you're working on today, or for the piece of for the work that you need to crack today, but rather it becomes a way of life. And that's actually, there's a Brazilian marketer, Ricardo Sapiro, who I talked to in the book. He has a lovely expression, repertoire. He says it's important to constantly be broadening one's repertoire, and that means kind of art and drama and indeed, you know, the fantastic top talk you had from Jim Carroll, I thought was a stunning example of immersion in a world that many of us maybe not wouldn't necessarily have looked at things with Jim's eyes before, but give us the ability to then think, gosh, yeah, actually, maybe I should go and spend some more time doing that. So curiosity, diversity, absolutely diversity. And I mean that both in terms of diversity of teams, looking to crack insights, but also diversity of stimulus, not looking for my side arguments, not looking to prove hypotheses. You know, the Karl Popper would spin in his grave if he thought people were proving rather than testing hypotheses, not looking in the usual place. You know, if you're a bleeding heart liberal, avoiding Breitbart. I'm not saying go and spend a whole lot of time in Breitbart and Mail Online, but looking for a diversity of stimulus. Very important. And
I think that Jim Carroll's talk, for anybody on this call who didn't listen to it, I would absolutely urge you to go and watch it and take it in, because it was quite extraordinary. It was called The Constellations of Art, but it was about life and strategy and understanding, and it was profoundly useful. We're running out of time almost. Graham, can I just ask you if we've answered your questions, because you raised the question about gender, I think following on from my comment.
I don't know. I know that you said that you don't collect the data with the APG, but maybe the IPA
does.
Yeah, I'd be very interested in that, because I mean, it's conspicuous in my experience, the number of women that I work with as clients. And, you know, while I wouldn't want to assign a gender bias in terms of an inclination towards insight, it is a really conspicuous bias amongst my clients. And I'd be interested to know whether that is played out across the business.
Mm-hmm. Right, a couple more very quickly. Sarah Benson, when looking for insight and data rather than imaginative leaps, how do we ensure it's right and that we're not seeing faces in the clouds that aren't there? Is there a best practice way to check our biases? Lovely little metaphor in there.
Well, gosh, I think I'd really need one notice to that question, and two, probably another hour to answer that. So I think there are two things to do with data. One is to take a first cut of data that ignores all outliers and cuts those outliers off. I'm imagining a normal distribution, but on any laydown of data that cuts the outliers off and ignores them entirely. And then, and it can be the same person or a different person in a team if you're working in a team, and then spend some time looking just at the outliers, because sometimes, as Gladwell in his book Outliers has demonstrated, but sometimes it's the outliers that tell us all about what's happening in the main noise of the data. They're able to tease us apart. So, I mean, if you look at a complete data set and you average things out, then outliers are just blurred out. If you cut them off, you're likely to have a cleaner, narrower central data set to look at, but then go and look at those on the outside.
Thank you. And Anthony's asked a question which I probably won't ask of you, because I think it's going to be answered by next week's talk from Loz Horner, because Anthony said, how do you achieve useful insight on a small budget? Not every company or organisation has the budget for deep insight or research. What practically can you do to find meaningful insight? And I think we're going to be exploring that in a great detail with lots of examples and case histories next week. But as we're just about to get to the end of it, Sam, huge thanks to you. That was really fascinating and wonderfully crisp and interesting, and I think has made us all think again about the process and the thinking around insights. So many thanks to you.
Thank you.